the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, our topic is why not to start an attack prematurely before developing your pieces. The following game that we'll examine is played between two Soviet grandmasters, Harlov and Kharitonov. Let's see how this game got started. Knight f3, d5, c4, e6, and now white continued with a not very ambitious looking b3 move. Here black continued with a natural knight f6 development move, although another interesting alternative would be the plan suggested by Grandmaster Ribli to play bishop e7 and then to offer the trade of bishops right away with bishop f6. Let's continue with the actual game, where black played knight f6, bishop b2, bishop e7. And this is the first interesting moment in the game where white played the unusual and I would say premature attack g4. The normal move would be just hold it off one square shorter, pawn to g3, not to g4. Well, the obvious idea of the move is to use the fact that if now the knight captures the pawn on g4, the pawn on g7 would be hanging also. Although white may choose rather to play rook g1 first than to capture on g7 immediately. Well, in case on the other hand, if black does not capture, then white is planning on an immediate attack with g5 and h4, as we shall see in the game. Well, here is a very important message to all who tend to be afraid of attacks as such. And I know a good number of people like that, especially in the intermediate or club level. So let's see how to play with black against a super aggressive opponent that starts out with g4 and h4 right early out of the opening. Black played very solidly and calmly, and as you'll see, if there isn't a weakness, if there isn't a mistake already made by the other side, such attacks would just defy by the logic of chess. Well, black castled, just playing a normal move that they would do otherwise. Castle, complete development, and then start creating a plan. White continued with g5, and now the knight went to e4. The g5 pawn is under attack, and now white had to protect the pawn by playing h4. Okay, so what did white achieve? Well, on one hand, they may have scared some black opponent, but at the same time what also has happened is that the white king stripped itself from the possible safety in castling to the king side. Also, if you look at the position, white has already moved pawns, in fact 2 pawns, on the queen side as well, so the potential of castling to the queen side doesn't look like a very tempting or safe one either. So what happened is, not only that white moved those pawns up on the king side, but with that the white king pretty much is stuck in the middle of the board, or wherever it castles, it will not find safety. Let's see how the game continued from here on. Black developed with knight c6. Now if white would play d3, the black knight would find a comfortable place on c5. Nothing to worry for black. White played bishop to g2, and now a very typical plan for situations when white develops with b3 and bishop b2, black played the positional a5. The idea is clear. Black intends to play a4 at the right moment and to open up the a file. At this stage, white indeed played d3, on one hand chasing the knight away from the center, and also to open up the d2 square, possibly for the knight or other pieces. knight goes naturally to c5. And here white perhaps changed his mind in putting the knight to d2 and rather developed in a different way, as we shall see. But let's just look at that for a moment. If the white knight would move to d2 right now, black, a very important move, black's plan is to close up that diagonal where the white bishop is aiming towards black's king side. And the problem is that the white camp is kind of disconnected from each other. It's very hard for white to get the pieces from the queen side of the board to the other side where they have already initiated an attack. Black has space advantage, and that is mostly what causes that problem. White does not have harmony between the pieces. And if you'd think to try to castle to the queen side and that way bring then the other rook to the king side would work or help, I don't think that would be the case, because we can already see how black is ready to attack on the queen side of the board, just in case, if that's what white would have in mind, black would immediately play a4 and open up the a file. Also, the two black knights are beautifully positioned towards the center on c6 and on c5. If white would dare to play queen c2, knight b4 would be in the air all the time. And that's, by the way, the other problem, that the white queen has a serious difficulty in getting to the king side. And as we know, no attack has its full potential or power without the queen being there to assist the attack. So in this situation, I would clearly take black and would not be a bit afraid of the white attack on the king side. Of course, you would still need to be careful and alert to white's attacking attempts. However, you can rest assured that objectively a position like this, an attack like this from white's side, cannot succeed if you defend correctly. Let's follow up again with the game and see what happened after white, instead of knight d2, rather developed the knight to a3. Not terribly much changed. Black continues in a similar way, playing d4, making sure to close up the diagonal, A, to gain space advantage, and B, to close up that powerful looking bishop on b2. Now it's no longer a powerful bishop on b2. In the contrary, it's a bishop that's pretty much out of play. The problem is that white has a very big difficulty to now or in the foreseeable future to play e3 and to reopen that diagonal, because if white would try that, black would simply trade the pawn on e3 and then capture the d3 pawn. So the game here continued by white playing knight to c2, attacking the d4 pawn yet another time. Fortunately for black, black can simply protect that pawn by advancing the pawn on the e-file, and moreover accomplish two more things with it. On one hand, open up the diagonal of the light squared bishop, and moreover strengthen the control of the center by protecting the d4 pawn with another pawn. Also, there may be situations when black would be ready to advance that very pawn further to e4, maybe not right away, but after preparing it just a tiny bit more. Perhaps to prevent that, white continued right now by playing knight d2. Although I can tell you I see an immediate logical problem with this concept. While I understand the idea of the move to prevent black's potential e5, e4 advance, if white would ever hope to have an attack on the king side, bringing pieces away from that part of the board to the other side certainly is not something that would help that cause. And black continues developing by the simple move of bishop to f5, controlling further the e4 square. In fact, if white would kind of just make waiting moves, eventually that's what would be and should be black's plan to play at the right moment with proper preparation e4, most likely by playing, for example, queen d7, putting the rook, at least a rook on e8, maybe a second rook on d8, and then at the right moment advance that pawn. If right now white would try to play knight e4, black would simply trade there with the bishop capturing first and creating double pawns for white. White played instead knight f1, trying to regroup the knight to g3. And this is an important moment on what to do next. And black found the correct plan. In view that the white king does not have a proper safety net to go to on either side of the board, it is a great idea to open the position by playing f6. Now black threatens to simply capture the pawn on g5, so white had to trade, and black captured back with the rook. Black has in mind to double up on the f-file later and put pressure on the f2 pawn. Also, there may be possibilities when that rook can go to g6 or h6 to attack white's weaknesses. White played knight g3, attacking the bishop. The bishop, of course, retreats. There is no reason to allow the trade of the knight for the bishop. And again, now we can start seeing that even though white was the one initiating an attack on the king side of the board, it is black who actually has the attack on that part of the board as well. And that's not a good scenario, when on both sides of the board your opponent is stronger, and in fact even in the center. White has totally misplayed this game, and you can see how a premature attack can backfire. If white right now would continue with knight e4, black would trade the knights, and then go after white's clear weakness, the pawn on h4, attack it, and then when that pawn advances, attack the second weakness on f2, causing white tremendous problems. Let's go back to the actual game. When after bishop went back to e6, white right now responded playing bishop a3. Black has retreated the rook to f7 to get away from any potential attack of the knight from h5 or e4, and of course also to open up the diagonal of the bishop towards the h4 pawn. And here white played queen d2, which is a natural looking move, although it probably causes further troubles. A bit better maybe to rather trade that bad bishop that didn't have much potential, and then centralize the knight on e4, and then advance with h5. That was white's best attempt. Instead, the game continued with white playing queen d2, and now black has some tactics coming up. Black played right now knight b4, a very smart move, based on the fact that if right now knight takes, pawn takes, and bishop takes, then all of a sudden black is winning right away by playing knight to b3. On the other hand, if white, instead of capturing with a bishop on b4, captures with the queen, that'd be horrendous, of course, allowing the discovery by knight d3. And finally, let's see what would happen if instead of capturing the pawn on b4 with either piece, the bishop retreats. Well, then of course white lost time, opened the a-file for the opponent, so just helped black, and it didn't make sense to capture on b4 the first place. In this case, black could continue by playing queen f8, pressuring the pawn on f2, and black's advantage would be very obvious. Again, let's go back to see what happened in the actual game after knight b4. White kind of ignored the situation and advanced the h-pawn further. Black played bishop g5, immediately taking advantage of the fact that white no longer controlled sufficiently the g5 square. Queen returned to d1, and now that the b4 knight is not in safety anymore, black retreated the knight. By the way, this is an important moment that follows the principle that when you have space advantage, do not help your opponent by exchanging pieces. It's a very simple logic that if you have limited space and a lot of pieces, they are kind of in each other's way. On the other hand, if you decide to trade equal value pieces, that limited space for less pieces is a little bit more comfortable. Like here we can see, for example, the white queen has hardly any reasonable moves. On the other hand, if the knights would be exchanged on c2, we could see how that queen would have a comfortable square on c2. So that explains black's next move, which was the retreat to a6. The idea is simply to keep more pieces on the board. And this had to be a sad moment for white, when white simply had to acknowledge that the attack did not work, and white, after all of this, ended up castling still on the king's side, obviously without the safety and protection of the g and the h pawns. And now black made another quiet and simple move, but a smart one, playing c6. It simply controls the d5 square and for later times opens up the c7 square for the black knight to come back to the game later. White right now continued with playing b4, kind of trying to open the position somewhere. It's true though that if white would kind of do nothing, black would bring the pieces to the king's side and develop an attack against the white king. Another perhaps better option though was to try to play bishop to c1 and exchange those dark squared bishops. Game continued with b4 as mentioned. Black took, knight took back, and black does it anyway. Bishop f4. White didn't really accomplish much by opening the queen side. Knights got traded, and the bishop returned to c1 now. And, as it's being known, the strongest piece in an attack is always the queen, and that's why black brings the queen to the attack, now threatens to capture on g3, and the knight cannot run away, because then black would checkmate immediately. So white didn't have much choice but to trade, but this causes to immediately lose a pawn. Knight moved to e4, and here is the pawn. So now black is a pawn up, and the attack continues. For example, one plan could be trying to get a rook to the h file to h6 to assist the black queen in the attack. White played rook to b1, and now another smart move, knight c5. On one hand, it follows the principle, when you're ahead in material, trade pieces. In this case, white's best positioned piece is the knight on e4, and therefore it's extra logical to exchange that piece. In addition, black has also opened up the a file, and now the black rook from a8 is targeting the pawn there. White continued by trading, queen took back, and queen d2, protecting the pawn on a2, and of course the queen did its job by recapturing on c5, and time to come back to g5. At this point white, perhaps a bit prematurely, but resigned, although there is no doubt that any grandmaster would win this game with black. There is an immediate threat to win with bishop h3 using the pin, as well as it looks rather scary when the black rook appears on the 6th rank, but in the meantime white wouldn't be losing right away, so to say, if they would play f3. Although, I have to say, it's a rather sad view to see that bishop on g2 being blocked up like this. And there is no doubt that black would win very easily. For example, they could play h5, h4 and so on, or just get the rooks involved on the 6th rank, or even doubling up on the e-file. But nevertheless, there would be still some technique to prove and to show, and on club level I certainly would not recommend to resign yet at such an early stage. And I think it was certainly a good example to show why it's not a good idea to start an attack prematurely instead of developing your own pieces. And now let's see the jewel of the week. Here we go. In this queen endgame, black is up 3 pawns. That is huge. 3 pawns is a lot. However, we can see at the same time that the black king is out there in the middle. However, oftentimes in endgames, that doesn't matter much. Here the problem is that black has a few too many pawns, and therefore the air around the black king is very limited. In fact, right now, there is no place where the black king could go. Yet, it's not quite as simple how to take advantage of that. As usual, I suggest you take some time and try to figure out on your own what the correct solution is. Then come back and check if your answer is right. Well, the answer is, actually, a quiet and simple move. None of the checks that white can give at the moment lead to any progress. The correct move is to play queen to e2. This quiet and peaceful looking move actually has a lot of poison in it. It threatens to checkmate right away with queen e3. If you look carefully, you'll notice the black queen cannot guard that square. So the only way to make a little escape window for the black king is by playing e4 right now, clearing the e5 square for the king's escape. Sadly for black, this is not sufficient either. Another quiet move decides the game to white's favor. And that move is queen e1, another very nice move that threatens with the immediate checkmate on g3. If the king would try to move to f3 in hopes of queen g3 to be answered by king e2, then white will checkmate right away with queen f1. Alternatively, if the black king moves to e5 running that direction, there is a new and totally different problem. It's not the king, but it's the queen. White has a discovered check by playing d4, and all of a sudden the black queen will be lost. A very elegant endgame composed by Kubel. Thank you so much for listening, and please be back next week for some more chess knowledge. Bye-bye.